September 26, 2020. In the wake of the George Floyd protests at the end of May, I predicted that we were in for a long, hot summer. Now, 4 months later, following mostly peaceful protests, often broken up by violent provocateurs, in Minneapolis, Kenosha, Seattle, Portland, D.C., and Louisville, not to mention dozens of other communities, the summer is coming to an end, but demonstrations for racial equality clearly are not. Mix in a presidential campaign in which one candidate, guess who, seems to believe that stoking racial animosity is the key to victory, and, oh yeah, a global pandemic in which the same candidate argues that politics trumps, so to speak, science. These are interesting times indeed. Then Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg up and died. Republicans raced each other to see who could fill her seat the fastest, and the incumbent White House dweller threatened to challenge the legitimacy of the upcoming election before a court in which he may have appointed a third of its members. We may soon have the makings of a full-blown constitutional crisis. While many of his strongest supporters believe the president when he says that the only way he can lose the election is by rigging the vote, those on the other side are clutching their pearls over the fact that we've always had a peaceful transition following a presidential election. Well, almost always. I mean, there was that time in 1860, and that time in 1960. Following the election of Abraham Lincoln, but before his inauguration, 7 southern states declared their secession from the Union. What followed, of course, was 4 years of bloody conflict, the first American Civil War. So yeah, not exactly a peaceful transition of power. 100 years later, the Second American Civil War was waged, as black Americans sought de jure recognition of the rights they thought had been guaranteed by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. If you doubt that the civil rights campaigns of the 1960s were every bit as much a war over federal sovereignty as was the conflict of the 1860s, I invite you to dive into Parting the Waters, America in the King Years, an 1,100-page doorstop of a book I'm currently working through. My point is that there hasn't always been a peaceful transition following a presidential election. And given the atomic dumpster fire that is 2020, why should we believe this year's electoral battle will be any more sanguine than that of 1860 or 1960? After all, the incumbent didn't promise to concede defeat last time around, continues to cry foul 4 years after he won that election, and has done everything he can to undermine confidence in this year's balloting. And with a weak ticket from a party with a history of electoral surrender, we may be in for a violent aftermath to the election characteristic of a banana republic, and not the kind of banana republic that sold clothes to the cool kids in the 90s. Elections have consequences. In this country, those consequences have included 2 civil wars and, now, a morally and intellectually weak strongman autocrat wholly supported by a party that will do anything in its power to keep its power, up to and including the legislative theft of 2 seats on the Supreme Court. But I'm probably wrong. After all, the Senate Majority Leader promised a peaceful transition following the November election. And Mitch McConnell would never go back on his word, right?